Thank you so much, Kevin. It's Pam here. Well, we're very pleased to be here today to provide folks with an overview of the work to date and the direction that we're looking ahead. I will be doing the front end of the presentation, and then I'll be turning it over to Sky. And of course, as Kevin mentioned, happy to answer any questions and happy to share our presentation after the fact. So a little bit of context for folks. I'm sure many of you have some of this information, but this provides a little bit of the rationale behind why we created Foundry. I think one of the facts that does surprise some folks is that we know that approximately 75% of mental health challenges will begin before the age of 24, and approximately 80% of the substance use challenges that people experience will begin by the age of 20. And so you'll see that the first slide here is really trying to describe the impact of people's daily lives based on age range. So at the bottom there, you see ages broken out. And so mental health and substance use challenges really do begin in that teen and early adult age range. Another way of looking at this is something that we like to do in health a lot, which is try to measure the global burden of disease. And again, as you can see here, broken out, mental illness and substance use challenges will really impact folks early on in adulthood, and then definitely taper off as people age. And of course, then physical illness is what the more of the global burden of disease as we get older. So this is a slide that I've started to use recently, and I think it really describes, gives you a bit of a picture in terms of what young people often experience when trying to access service for mental health challenges, and their parents or caregivers as well. We know that there are approximately 130,000 young people in this province at any given time who are struggling. And 2/3 of those folks, or about 76,000 of them, will not receive access to care. Often when folks are trying to access services, every door is definitely feeling like the wrong door. There's not an easy way to navigate service. And even when folks are successful in accessing services that they're going to screen into, they're told that they have to wait between 6 and 9 months to actually speak to somebody about how they're feeling. And we know that for young people and for everybody, often we really need to connect with them in times of crisis, or when they've mustered up the courage to ask for help. And if they're having to wait and linger on a wait list for a number of months, all that's happening is that their symptoms are getting more acute, and potentially they're disengaging from wanting to access care. So this slide really is just it's a bit messy here, but we're trying to demonstrate or articulate the number of reports and recommendations that have come from the provincial government here, or external stakeholders, including the representative for children and youth. And a couple of documents that you see depicted here are internal BC government documents and work. So you are probably aware that there's a select standing committee on children and youth that has been, for the last few years, really focused in on the issue of mental health and substance use challenges. So they did make some recommendations for government. One of those, and this was under the previous Liberal government, one of the recommendations was around the development of integrated youth services for youth and young adults. The representative for children and youth has done various reports and published various recommendations around the fractured and siloed system here in British Columbia, which is not unique. We know that the same challenges are in other jurisdictions and certainly in other countries. So what we've tried to do with Foundry is, early days we did a pretty significant analysis of all of these recommendations and tried to build a model and a service that answered as many of those as possible. Just to give you some context and some history here, we sent out an expression of interest. I'm going to talk about that in just a second here, but we were fortunate enough in 2015, our sort of founding partners came together to really, in the early days, we talked about this as a proof of concept to develop 5 one-stop shops across the province. So we wanted to be sure that we had one in each geographical region as we started. And at the beginning, we had funding to operate those centers for 3 years. And we had dollars that we were cobbling together to support the team that I'm now leading. But this was one of the things that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail is an interesting and I think a bit innovative model whereby government dollars are matched by significant philanthropic investment as well. So in 2015, December, we did launch an expression of interest where we, I think there's a bit of anxiety that we had when we sent this out, hoping that people would respond to it. And we did get a significant response. We sent this through our contacts, who then, amplified through their contacts, and we received we had a very short timeline, a month, for folks to get back to us, and we had 25 different communities who had responded to our expression of interest. The next slide here just outlines a number of the partners that we have been working with. We are at close to 140 now, and that continues to grow as we continue to expand. Maybe I'll just go back here, actually. Oh, no, we'll talk to it in a second. I think one of the things that people often ask us, well, I know that one of the things that people often ask us is, where did Foundry come from in terms of the name and your brand? When we started this thing, we were calling ourselves the BC Integrated Youth Services Initiative, which is a bit of a mouthful, and that was intentional. We always had plans to brand because we know that if young people, in terms of, if we think back to the navigation problems, if young people living in their communities know that there's a Foundry Center in their community, then they know where to go for help. So we spent over a year developing this brand, and we hired a design firm to help us with the work. And they held several different discovery sessions with over 100 young people across BC, and in fact had a couple of sessions outside of BC just to see whether or not there were any differences in how folks responded to that or what young people thought made sense. And so there were no differences across the jurisdictions, which we thought was interesting. And the process wasn't about, tell us what you think the name should be or what the color should be. What the process was, first of all, do you think that integrated youth services, a one-stop shop, makes sense? And folks responded well to that. And then they walked them through an exercise where they asked them questions like, what would this center need to look and feel like for you to want to actually come and access service? What would your experience need to be? What would it need to feel like for you to want to come back? And importantly, what would it need to feel and look like for you to recommend it to your friends? So we had a number of options in terms of the name. Some of them were things like Wellspring and Springtide and Join and a few others. And what we heard, that the name was selected through a working group that worked for a number of months to sort of whittle it down. And they really liked Foundry. First of all, a number of young people don't have any connotation to what we would think of as a traditional Foundry, facility. They liked the fact that the word found was in it. They liked the fact that it felt like a strong foundational kind of name. And they told us overwhelmingly that they didn't want to see a name that was overly cheery, because that's not how they're feeling most of the time. So you can see our taglines here. Well, where wellness takes shape is a nod to a Foundry. And what it's allowed us to do too, without a strong connotation to the word, is really build a full-on brand DNA that supports what we do. And as we now start to build out our quality improvement process and program, we're really linking the quality improvement aspects of the work to our client experiences. So the brand is really guiding us as we flesh that work out. So Foundry's vision is to transform access to health and social services for youth and families. We're not talking about tweaking the system around the edges. We know that hasn't worked. We are talking about full-on transformation. And it's really interesting. I'll be sharing with you a little bit later on what we're starting to see happen in communities. But it also means that we are, both from a provincial perspective and also our centers locally, are we're acting a little bit as disruptors, and that's a great thing. but it's also, you know, an area that constantly challenges us to sort of keep our true north and continue on in terms of what we hear from young people and families is needed. So currently, here's our status right now. We have 7 centers open. You can see, whoops, I'm not sure what happened there. They're scattered around the province. Again, we've got 2 located in each of the regional health authority geographic areas. We are about to open Penticton. I think it's a June opening date, mid-June. And then we're working with 3 more. We are hoping that this is just the beginning of our centers. Foundry was referenced in the throne speech, the budget documents this February. Details were given, but we do expect that there's definitely been an indication there that we will be expanding further. So I'm just going to walk you through quickly some images of the centers, and you can see how the brand shows up, the youth-friendly one-stop shops. You'll see a common look and feel, but of course they're all different. And that is, you know, we found that it's taken us a little while, but we found that balance between ensuring that there's a common look and feel so that young people know what to expect and there's a level of consistency, because we do see that young people are traveling from one community to another and going into Foundry centers and expecting this service. But it also allows for community variability based on what the needs are. So this is our Vancouver center, which was the first to open and really served as a prototype for us. We learned a lot about what works really well and also what needs to look a little bit different. This is Campbell River, operated by the John Howard Society of the North Island. So that's another thing I think that's novel about Foundry, is that each of our lead operators are unique and individual organizations. Most of them not-for-profits, but a couple are health authority run. So this is after not long after they opened, and there's definitely a presence that Campbell River has established in the community through different events. This is Kelowna, operated by the Canadian Mental Health Association. This center won a design award. It's probably to date our most spiffy center. And I'll talk more in detail about the philanthropy that Foundry is attracting. But the government was able to provide a certain amount of capital dollars for the establishment of these centers, which isn't enough. And we knew that we wanted to make these spaces very youth-friendly and welcoming. And so that funding that the government provides, that base funding, really helps to leverage additional philanthropic funds to meet the delta between what's provided by government and what's actually needed. CMHA early on developed a partnership with the Kelowna General Hospital Foundation, who for the first time ever set a campaign that was situated outside of the hospital, understanding that comprehensive services in the community would help, of course, down the road in terms of who's showing up at the hospital and the emergency department. So they set a goal of $2 million, and that goal was met within about 5 months, and they have since long surpassed that. The picture on the bottom there is something that I think is one of the sweetest things I've seen, which is a young girl in the community came and gave of her own money, $500, to support Foundry Kelowna. This is the North Shore. The North Shore is operated by Vancouver Coastal Health, and you may pick up here, there's, amongst all of our centers, it's a little bit more clinically feeling than the others, which I think is really interesting. But it's a beautiful center. It's also one of our biggest footprints, close to 9,000 square feet. This is Prince George, operated by the YMCA of Northern British Columbia. You can't quite see it here, but the bottom photo, if you look just to the right of the Y, you can see that's actually a doorway, and that's a sacred space that they've created, which has been ventilated to allow for smudging and different spiritual and cultural activities. And that's something that some of our other centers have picked up on and are emulating as well. This is a photo of Victoria, which of course, for many reasons, is a bit of a important center for us, being that, of course, that's our provincial capital, and folks are able to kind of tour through that center quite easily compared to others. So that was opened in April of last year, and it's run by the Victoria Youth Clinic, which is a long-standing, very reputable primary care service that they're now building out to include the other services. And this was Foundry Abbotsford, which took a long time to open. There were some challenges for them to find a space, but they did, and it's beautiful. This is a good example where the health authority, Fraser Health, has co-located a significant amount of youth mental health and substance use services. So the early psychosis program and a few others, they are actually able to move a service from the hospital, which is a very expensive place for youth to be served and not really appropriate, to this community storefront, which is great. You'll see on the right hand side there, that's a donor wall. So again, we do recognize the significant and generous donors, both from a provincial perspective, but of course locally as well. And you'll note that there's a photo of a kitchen on the top left. Each of our centers has a teaching kitchen where, you know, that's a social place for folks to gather. There's different groups that come and are able to eat together, but also we do provide some life skills training for young people who are on a pretty fixed income. Folks will be taken out and basically shown how to eat nutritiously on a limited budget, and then they'll cook the meals themselves in the center. So if folks are familiar with the collective impact approach, my team here and the team that Sky and I are part of really forms the backbone organization for a typical collective impact approach. And listed here, you'll see some of the main functions that we facilitate, all the way from the actual capital establishment to the service model development, the training needed for folks to understand what our model is and to be able to practice in the modalities that we've identified have the best evidence behind them, our branding and communications, knowledge mobilization. I think one of the major value propositions for belonging to the Foundry Network is the sharing of information across the centers. We're able to amplify some of the innovations that are happening in local communities and share that across. Because what we found, the richness with having individual organizations, is that they all do something really, really, really well and creatively that we're able to then share. So this is just a high-level depiction of our integrated step care model in terms of the levels of service that are provided. So the whole idea behind our integrated step care model is that we want to ensure that we are matching the level of need that a young person has with the right intensity of service. So we also want to be able to provide the least intrusive service. This is really about the idea that one approach does not work the same for everyone. And so we really tailor services and support that young people receive based on who they are and what they're needing and also what they're wanting. There's a significant amount of empowerment that's provided to young people in terms of helping to select the service that fits right for them. One of the things I think that's most transformational about the services that we provide is walk-in counseling. So this is really through a solution-focused brief therapy approach, which we know is for many young people all that is necessary. Of course, for many people, they're needing and wanting ongoing support, and that's provided to them, of course. So every center will provide certain hours of walk-in, which will sometimes coincide with walk-in for primary care as well, and also peer support. So this is the North Shore, and we're looking at ways of expanding the hours for walk-in counseling. So the real challenge for us is really moving to a fully integrated model here. Just wanting to jump ahead here. So it's one thing to co-locate services within a center. It's quite another to have folks from various different organizations integrating in terms of the services that young people receive. So that is a very seamless experience. And it's something that we continue to work on. Really what we've come to understand is these are sort of the phases of our integration. Most of our centers are sort of at initial implementation, working towards integration. Of course, the ones that haven't opened yet are really at the engagement and the development stage. But what we're understanding is that for true integration, this is an ongoing process. And even for those centers who've been open for quite a while, including Kelowna, which is doing incredibly well, they're needing additional support to just get to that next level of integration, which of course, there's some systemic challenges to that in terms of information technology, electronic medical records, and all of that, but we are pushing forward with it. So through the developmental evaluation that has been with us since the beginning, we've had Dr. Amy Salmon providing really interesting support in terms of observing what's happening through the centers, but of course also from our central office team. And she's released a report, she's published or written a report that was made public a few months back, which we're happy to share, that really speaks to, what works well and what some of the centers are telling us that needs to be done differently. Fundamentally, as I just mentioned, this isn't about folks just working together under one roof, but really everyone working together. What we found is that this is about a creation of a new service network, and really we've found that the Foundry centers and the communities where it's located is really shifting and changing the policy and service landscape. So the type of leadership that shows up, that change leadership and understanding how to work differently across services, the policy piece, and also philanthropy needs to look and be different. Peer support is really also a fundamental aspect of our model. Peer support is, it's part of the care team at each of the centers. This is a photo of Jenny and Nigel, who are peer support workers in Abbotsford. What peer support does is provides opportunity to paid employment for young people with lived experience. So all of our peer support workers have in some way, shape, or form had their own lived experience with mental health or substance use challenges. And we understand from young people that sometimes that's what they want to have access to, is to talk to somebody else who's gone through a similar challenge. It also provides opportunity for young people to see themselves and be seen as experts in the area of youth and family wellness. So our youth peer support program is building out quite nicely. And now we're starting to turn attention to building out a family peer support program, because of course we know that parents and caregivers are also needing access to talk to other people who have been through similar situations with their own children. We're working in partnership with Children's Hospital to, we have developed a website. I don't know if any of you were familiar with an older website called mindcheck.ca. Was, pardon me, a little bit Degrassi High looking. It was a little outdated. So they approached us wanting to migrate that website into a new FOUNDRY'S.ca website, which of course we totally supported. And if you're not aware of it, there's a significant amount of information and resources for teachers and others. And I'm just going to now turn it over to, maybe I'll just quickly, this is a bit of a roadmap to our eHealth strategy. So the eHealth platform is, of course, the website that you all have access to. If you don't have the address, I'll give it to you again. Okay. And so the three main chunks of the work, of course, the young people is probably the most important one in terms of the different information that we provide. And then what Skye's going to walk you through in a minute is really more around the families and professionals. So for schools, for educators and administrators, and I guess counselors as well, of course. And then our eHealth services, where we are building out a virtual clinic in partnership with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, and Children's Hospital, where we, our objective and our aim is to increase service reach to the point that young people, no matter where they live in BC, will have access to therapeutic supports virtually.
All right, so this is Skye speaking. I just wanted to walk you through some resources that are actually on the Foundry BC webpage. And we've had quite a number of asks and requests to come to schools and to talk to schools. And I think this, when we saw and met Kevin in Victoria that day, I thought this would be a great opportunity to share widely some of the resources that we're developing. but also just to note that we're trying to be open as well to any ideas that you might have and things that you think are helpful within your organization or school. We're very open to being able to try and use this platform to share this knowledge. So on the Foundry BC homepage, there are 3 buttons at the bottom of Info and Tools, Get Support, and Supporting Others. And the Supporting Others button is the best resource for you. And I also just want to point to the exclamation mark that's on the right-hand side. And this is an exclamation mark that highlights where any crisis supports are locally within your community. But the button I want to focus on today is the Supporting Others button. So that brings you to this page, and there are 2 boxes that are relevant, I believe, for you, and there are several other boxes, so feel free to look at the boxes for healthcare professionals or friends if they're relevant. So the 2 questions we have from the school's perspective are, what can I do for the school's perspective? What can teachers do? What can principals or vice principals do? And then the other question is, how can I help families? What information can I give to families of young people who may be struggling? So again, the target audience for Foundry is 12 to 24-year-olds. And so a lot of the resources that are available are targeting this age range. So if you go, for example, to school professionals, this is the landing page, and there's information specifically about featured resources for school, information about mental health, information just about general health conditions, wellness, and different strategies to use within the school environment. So one of the very core values of Foundry and the services that are provided at Foundry is that care is provided in context of what's important to young people and their families. So we're not treating what's broken at the level of the brain, we're treating the person and what's important to them. And we feel that it's really important to keep young people engaged in their occupations or the roles and responsibilities that they're committed to at that stage of their development and their life. And so a lot of these resources are really contextualized in understanding mental health and substance use disorders in the context of what's important to young people at that stage in their life, and also about how to continue supporting families and friends in this journey, because it's not a journey that is ideally taken alone. And so if you were to hit on the resource for schools, this is some other types of examples of resources that are there. I want to also point that there's a new part of this website there's tips about mental health. There's also a new part that I think is quite helpful about talking with young people about cannabis. And just given changes of laws recently in Canada, this might be a fairly useful resource for some people. And a lot of the questions we get in working with our stakeholders is, I just need to talk about it, but I don't know how to talk about it. I don't even know how to have the conversation with my student, with my family member, with my friend. And a lot of these resources that are here are there to help with that. So we have 3 types of evaluation that are underway, and this is a relatively new initiative in British Columbia, and we evaluate in different ways. And this is talking to a bunch of teachers. It's nothing to explain to you, but really the main message from this slide is that we continue to work with all of our partners across British Columbia. And schools keep on coming up as this core partner that we need to support and work with to understand how we can add value to the services that you provide and the excellent teaching and models that you provide across the province. But we do feel that there's opportunities to learn from you and support your excellence as well. So this is just an information slide, but also to learn that the stakeholders that we continue to work from the province, the schools are quite critical in our growth and moving forward in all aspects of our evaluation. One of the challenges for the Foundry centers, and perhaps also something we have to learn from education, is that every single Foundry is located in a different health authority that uses a different electronic medical record system to collect data. So we have a centralized data collection system called Toolbox, and that is used so that we have a centralized systematic way of capturing data at all of the centers. And this data actually is just a little bit outdated, but right now we have over 7,100 young people that have accessed Foundry since April 2018. And they're not accessing it once, they're accessing it many more times than once. And some of our centers are seeing people on a very regular basis. And the distribution of folks is about 40% are coming in for requesting mental health and substance use services specifically. and, or sorry, 67% are accessing mental health services specifically, which is great and it's important. But we also have a lot of young people who are walking in, receiving other services such as physical health and sexual health counseling. The age range at registration is right around 19 years old. And this age range, when we first opened in the first days, was closer to 16, 17. And we're starting to see some folks that are a little bit older walking through. But just of note that we are seeing young people who are less than 12 years old and people who are all the way up to 25. And the primary group of people that we're seeing are in this really critical developmental period of transitioning in their lives from usually high school into either meaningful employment or post-secondary education. And we are starting to see an increase in number of young people who are coming and reporting great levels of anxiety and stress with this particular period of their lives, which if to this particular audience that we're talking to today should not be a surprise at all, but really highlights the emphasis and the need to understand how this type of model and mental health services can be provided and be a value added to the education curriculum and system that we have right now to ensure that this experience is seamless and nobody falls through the cracks. One of the interesting things also is that this has been a very grassroots movement in terms of how young people are walking in, and most people are reporting that they heard about Foundry through a friend or a family member and a local doctor or nurse, which is a great thing. So there's a lot of talk about it, and the communities that have a Foundry located, especially our smaller communities, have really built a momentum behind the idea of talking about mental health and substance use. And access to these services is a good thing, and really focusing on the health promotion aspect of care.
Sky, can I just add? So Toolbox began rolling out in April of 2018. Before that, we were capturing this information through paper and pen, which was manually entered. But so in early days, for the first year, the biggest referral source to Foundry was actually school counselor or teacher, which was fantastic for us to see. And this is also wonderful for us because, of course, as we talked about earlier in terms of the brand, young people referring their friends or telling their friends about it is exactly what we wanted to see.
In BC and actually in Canada, new data has come out in the US this month, particularly looking at emergency room utilization by young people in crisis going up in between 200 and 500% in the last 6 years specifically. And so this is quite interesting for us and really important, again, that we start to understand if there was no Foundry Center, where would young people be going? And so young people, about 30% are saying that they wouldn't have gone anywhere, they wouldn't have sought help, which is really reflective across the country that close to half of the young people with a mental health condition or substance use disorder are actually not seeking help or accessing the services they need. They would have contacted a friend or family, which is also important information for us to know about how do we incorporate friends and family into care. But also they would have gone to school counselors, and what we have heard overwhelmingly across the province from school counselors about increase in access to their services and a need to have support in this area to provide comprehensive care. Another thing to highlight is that we were aiming to have a whole range of services provided for young people from low distress all the way to high, but it appears that the majority of young people who are walking in our centers are reporting not just high distress, but very high levels of distress. And so compared to Canadian norms, this data is approximately 2 to 3 standard deviations beyond the norm. So our young people are either reporting higher levels of anxiety than ever, or we're just not measuring it the best way possible. And so we have to think somewhere in between there. But on average, we don't have a lot of young people walking in with just a little bit of distress. How they perceive their distress is very high and very significant and warrants quite a lot of attention. And also we have a question in to screen for suicidal ideation. And the specific question was, when was the last time you had significant problems with thinking about ending your life or committing suicide? And we had a close to 2,500 people respond to this question in our recent data poll, and over 36% are saying in the last month, and it's quite significant and much higher than the population norm, and really brings up the idea of the importance of asking the question and screening for suicide ideation, but also being able to develop care pathways and services to make sure that we can support this needs if they actually are endorsing this item or this question.
This is really, it's Pam here, just a measure of client satisfaction in terms of the services that they received and their willingness to refer somebody to this service. So what this depicts here is that 91% of youth responded that they would refer their friends or family members, and 94 reported being generally satisfied with the services that they received. So either strongly agree or agree. We will be unpacking this as we move forward again, but as an initial sort of data point, it's positive. And I think this is, if not the last, close to the last slide. And this really speaks to, again, through our developmental evaluation, what we're starting to see through our Foundry centers across the network. As we were starting, or about a year into the process, Dr. Amy Salmon asked people, she talked to over 100 folks, and asked them to describe Foundry to her. What is Foundry? And the initial description involved laying out the core services. So Foundry is primary care, mental health, substance use, peer support, and social services. That's what Foundry meant to folks. And then a year later, after centers had been open and people had been interacting with and receiving service and supports through Foundry, the same question was asked, and this is what's showing up. So through her analysis, Amy and her staff have developed these 4 main quadrants or themes. So Foundry is a drop-in single point of access. In other words, no doors, there is no wrong door. And I think really interestingly, what we heard quite clearly from a number of people, or what Amy heard, was that folks at Foundry are working hard to screen people in as opposed to screening them out, which is kind of a different experience if we think back to the every door is the wrong door with the image that we looked at earlier. Foundry is showing up to be relationship building. So certainly building connections between young people and clinicians, but also working hard to sustain those, which is enabling young people to, of course, feel safe, feeling like they don't have to tell their story more than once, and feeling just safe to actually share with folks at Foundry. So referrals are tailored, minimized, and invisible. And of course, you don't need a referral to go to Foundry, but referrals do get made, of course, through schools or through GPs or others. And one of I think the innovative things about Foundry, of course, is that being a one-stop shop, if a clinician's working with a young person and they feel that they may benefit from a different service that's offered through Foundry, they can offer that to the young person. And the referral often involves walking across the hall or around the corner to make that introduction to another clinician. And then empowering youth as care seekers, which I alluded to earlier. We're really seeing that youth are being empowered to take the lead in deciding what they want and when they want it. There's a suite of services that are offered, and working in collaboration with a clinician or even maybe a peer support worker, they identify what they think makes the most sense. This is, when we look at this is something that continues to evolve. One of the things that we're committed to at Foundry is continuing to evolve both the services, but everything else that we do in terms of what young people are telling us they need and want. And so that's it. So we thank you very much. I know that was a lot of information, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Pam and Sky, for a really comprehensive overview and a really impressive amount of traction that Foundry has been able to create across the province in a very short amount of time. So I'm curious about what next steps are for Foundry. What would you like to see in terms of Foundry's evolution moving forward?
Mm-hmm. I'll start with as Pam here and Sky jump in. So of course, our broad vision is to see 30 to 50 centers across BC. And so we're working at that. We'll continue to expand as we go. I think, you know, one of the things that we're looking to build out, we've got the clinical model pretty well developed, and of course we're supporting centers come online as they do to understand that and to integrate across their partners, and the training that's involved in ensuring that there's fidelity to that. We're also looking at ways to work with others to build out some more holistic aspects to the centers. So that could include, and this is already happening to some extent in certain centers, but to build out more of opportunities to connect to nature. We are partnering with the BC Parks Association around a Healthy by Nature initiative that they have, which is literally providing prescriptions to outdoor time and space. And so we think that through some foundation dollars, we'll be able to build that out in a more consistent way across the network. That could include opportunities for sort of mindfulness, music therapy, art therapy, just whatever the young people in that center think would be helpful for them. That's what we're starting to build out. And then again, of course, we're building out that virtual clinic. I think that in terms of increasing service reach, that's a game changer for us. And we're really excited about how that's unfolding.
A question from one of our participants. So very impressed by the model. The question is, are you finding that you are able to find enough professionals to work in your clinics?
That is a great question. We know that there's, you know, generally a challenge with health human resources across, well, everywhere. So we're needing to be a little bit creative, especially when we go to more rural and remote communities. We are starting to work with Terrace, and it's not on our map yet, but we are also having conversations with Hazelton. So we will be needing to figure out how we provide that service when there's more challenge to recruitment and retention. But I would say that what we've been very pleased by and didn't really expect to see is that there are a number of professionals who are attracted to the team-based care model and who are opting to even move communities so that they can work in the Foundry Center. So that includes, you know, general practitioners, physicians, as well as other mental health clinicians and whatnot. And the other thing that we're starting to see, and actually we've seen this for a while, is people who are working in a center in Vancouver and maybe want to move to a different community, they've transferred to different Foundry centers. So we've had that in Kelowna, we've had that to Victoria, which is great because what that serves to do is incubate just different learnings and different processes that other centers have employed.
Thank you for that. And as Foundry continues to grow, just a bit of perhaps a two-part question. So I'm curious as to what schools can do to help support Foundry's initiative, and what our association can do representing 2,500 principals and vice principals across the province.
Another good question. So quickly, I'll tell you a little bit about what's happening locally. We, as part of the governance structure, we've asked centers to create local leadership tables, and those leadership tables are represented by the school districts, typically at the vice superintendent or the superintendent. I think in some of the smaller communities, it does include the principals and vice principals as well. And so that's been incredibly successful in terms of the linkage there between what's happening at school and what's happening in the Foundry Center. There's other relationships happening with the post-secondary sector as well. So another, I think an interesting thing that's happening on the North Shore through Mountainside Secondary, which is I'm not sure who's on the call right now. So that's an alternate program for the North Vancouver School District. And there's a significant sharing of resources, or in reach, I guess I could say, where some of the clinicians who operate out of the Foundry North Shore spend some of their time at Mountainside seeing young people there. So there's all sorts of opportunities, and I think depending upon what comes from the Ministry for Mental Health and Addictions around their child and youth mental health and addiction strategy, there could be further opportunity to work together, ensuring that there's a strong pathway between and connection between schools and the Foundry centers.
All right, thank you for that. And I want to thank Pam and Sky for their presentation today. I think they've certainly given us a lot to think about as we move forward. Sorry, I have one more question that's popped up. So if I, before we wrap up, have there been discussions with First Nations schools, either First Nations Education Steering Committee or the First Nations School Association, to provide services to the First Nations schools?
So yeah, great question. No, we have been working quite closely with the First Nations Health Authority and other specific Indigenous organizations within, locally, helping to support that. We have not connected with FNESC, and I think that that's a really, really good suggestion, and we'll do that. I think Hazelton is a really interesting opportunity for us to learn significantly, and I don't know exactly what the education makeup is in terms of the schools that exist in and around Hazelton, but if there's specific suggestions that people have, we'd be really happy to hear those. But we will reach out to the provincial body and connect on what they think might be what we should understand or maybe think about.
All right, well, thank you again. I really appreciate your time today, Pam and Sky, and such an informative webinar in terms of the wraparound support services that Foundry provides for youth. And with that, I want to bring our webinar to a close. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you again to Pam and Sky for sharing. Thanks, everyone.